Hello, my name is Scott Vinn, and I'm the design principal at Integrated Architecture. And for the past few months, I've had the honor and privilege of working with the steering committee on the Jewish collaboration. While there's been numerous meetings and discussions and planning that's been involved in the collaboration, one of the important points of the initial study was to do a space study of both Temple Emmanuel and Ahavas Israel's campuses. And what I'd like to do today in this short video is go over that space study. It's been presented a number of times to town halls and to both congregations, but with the pandemic, it's hard for everybody to access information and to make meetings. So we wanted to make sure that we could show the information in this study to everyone. I'm now going to share my screen here. So the space study is focused on looking at how spaces are used today and to try and forecast what kind of space needs are going to be needed in the future. And we're doing this so that we were able to look at both campuses from an equal lens to try and determine the best path forward for the Jewish community in West Michigan in Grand Rapids. Looking at the sites, both sites are zoned under the same zoning, which means they have the same requirements or restrictions for the height of the building, for the setbacks, for the amount of green space and tree canopy coverage. So all those standards apply to both equally. The parking also is the same requirements for both sites, in that we need one space for every 4 seats in the sanctuary. The big difference, obviously, is the size of the 2 lots. The Ahavas site obviously being a much larger site on a much different context in terms of its setting, while the Temple site is in a residential area with limited ability to grow in terms of site capacity. So I'll get into that a little bit more as we get into the specifics of each site. So as I mentioned before, the first thing we wanted to do is really understand the current opportunities and challenges, the restrictions, the issues that are surrounding or existing in the 2 buildings. We wouldn't want to make an addition or invest any money or resources into the building without fixing the things that are already resident problems. So looking at the Temple Emmanuel building, some of the issues, obviously safety is first and foremost, and you're going to find that at both campuses. Anything from being able to see into the building, the exposure of the kids on Sunday mornings to the outside, movement in and out of the building, points of entry, just making sure that the buildings are accessible and safe, and in terms of how you enter the buildings and who's greeting you and how you're being checked in. These are all things that need to be evaluated and addressed with any additions and even without any additions to this specific building. Restrooms in this building need upgrading. I think that's something that's been on the list for the Temple Emmanuel board for quite a while, both from an accessibility standpoint for some of the bathrooms and then just from a general finish standpoint. The office flow could be improved. It's in a good position and it's centrally located, although the office has limited ability to greet people. So when there's low occupancy in the building and somebody comes to the building, it's hard for greeting. You have to rely on a buzzer system. And at times the shared office right in the middle of the building can become congested, and a lot of the support spaces are across the hall. Increased archive space is something that is certainly on the radar for any changes to this building. The archive program starts in the space behind the sanctuary, but it really extends into storage areas and into display cabinets, and needs to be both improved in terms of the amount of space, but then just in terms of how it supports the archive activities. The north entry is maybe one of the largest single items that needs to be addressed, whether the building is expanded or not. The entry in for the north obviously is important. That's where the parking is. But right now, everything from safety to just the flow to the welcoming to the overall experience of that entry is lacking and not well thought out. I think the building was originally designed with more of a front-facing Fulton side or south side entry. That's the more ceremonial entry, but the fact is the parking, which the congregation relies on, is to the north. And therefore, walking down those stairs or going down the ramp and then in through a tight door especially on Sunday mornings when we're dropping off our kids and you're inside a very tight hallway and right in front of some restrooms and a lot of activity. It's not fostering community or a warm sense of welcoming. Obviously, UJS is housed in this building. The space actually accommodates UJS quite well. I had a discussion with both rabbis in terms of how UJS is functioning. There's some issues with the location that you have to go through a multi-purpose space to access it, which really makes the multi-purpose space more of a hallway than a true multi-purpose space. It's not great for check-in. Again, it's not great for that whole drop-off and pickup. And then UJS would benefit from a few additional small group study areas so that if a group has to break off from the larger classroom and do some individual study or small group study, that space could be afforded them. So then looking at the site for the Fulton Street campus, obviously some of the positive attributes are that a lot of the space is in really good shape. It's a beloved architecture. It's actually a recognized piece of architecture that Mendelssohn designed in the 50s and has been recently published. It's filled with natural light. And I think anybody who's ever been in the building appreciates kind of the style and the feel of the space. The outdoor courtyard is a great amenity, giving not only a great outdoor space for people to gather and to worship, but it provides a great connection to all the spaces that surround it. Some of the challenges, obviously, though, with the site are just the size. It's in a residential area. It's got limited growth. The parking is restricted in terms of its ability to expand. There's some site drainage issues on the east side of the building. But a lot of these things I think you'll find in this study are all things that can be solved and worked upon and resolved. So what we did next was we took, after a number of discussions that we had with representatives of Ahavis and Temple and UJS, as well as Federation and Jewish Theater, we tried to, at a very high level, understand what needs to fit at a minimal level to create a Jewish collaboration, to create a combined campus. And then we applied that program equally to both sites to see how the fit would look. Now, this is far from a completed design. It doesn't have the rigor and the thought and the analysis and the iterations that it takes to get to a solution that's going to work for everybody as a completed and well thought through design. But what it does do is it tests the capacity of the site, and it gives us an idea of what the fit might look like. And you'll see that we applied all of this thinking in a very equitable way to both sites so that we could, again, use this information to make decisions moving forward and hopefully head towards a true full design effort in which we analyze the size of the kitchens and we analyze the size of the sanctuaries and we really understand the adjacencies that are important. So this first test fit, you'll see we're going to do this for both campuses. Anything in orange is in addition. Anything in blue is a fairly major renovation or repurpose of space. And then the real positive for this site is anything in white. So all of the areas, mainly in the UJS classroom, the large sanctuary, the social hall, and some of the classrooms, all of that space is in really excellent shape. It doesn't really require any renovation at all, which really reduces the amount of investment that needs to go into making this building switch from a single congregation to a shared congregation situation. The building does, again, as I mentioned, sit on a residential site, residentially surrounded site. Therefore, the setbacks from Lawndale and from Holmdene, the building already exceeds those setbacks. The city most likely will not allow us to continue to go beyond the setbacks, so we'll have to work within those. And as well as parking, there's not a lot of room, if any, to add on parking. We can add some parking on the south side of the building. Obviously, that would be a trade-off for green space and some wonderful mature trees. Any parking on the south or the front of the building would have to go through a variance process, as that's not the intent of the city to put parking in the front of buildings in this area. But as there's parking that exists today, that variance is a likely thing that we could probably work through, especially if it's limited parking for barrier-free and potentially some daytime visitors for office use. As for the parking to the north, the collaboration has acknowledged the fact that this could be a problem, specifically on high holidays or large community events, not on a regular basis, but during those peak periods of use. And there has been discussions with the church directly to the north about a park sharing program. The city is very in favor of park sharing programs. It's something that my office has done with projects in the past. It's really to keep sizes of parking lots limited. The last thing any of the residential neighborhood wants is a larger parking lot or a structured multi-level parking deck. So the church was very open to a sharing parking program in which a valet system or a drop-off system could be used to take care of larger influxes of parking needs. So if we zoom in a little bit, now north is to your right, for those of you that see the drawing is rotated. Lawndale is at the bottom, Holmdene is at the top, and Fulton is to your left. Again, this is showing a possibility for where growth could happen, renovation could happen to meet the requirements of the collaboration. Not all of this has been resolved. This is not a completed design that has gone through all of the discussions of size and adjacency. And in fact, there's been a lot of challenges to this, which is a natural part of the design process. But again, what we did is we tried to make sure that things would fit. With this tighter site, we wanted to make sure that we could fit the full program on here and then understand what our capacity is for space even beyond that. Once we get into the design, it's decided that we actually do need additional space to accommodate a successful collaboration and a future for the Jewish community. So anything in orange, as I mentioned, is new construction. So maybe starting at the top of the page, it's been a common discussion and opinion that there'll need to be 2 kitchens, 1 kosher, 1 non-kosher, on the campus to support the 2 different congregations. So we're looking at potentially, again, this is all stuff that needs to be finalized and worked through on many levels in terms of the sizing and the storage and the flow and the capacity of the food that's being made. Its relation to the setbacks and the trees that are existing in this area, but the idea is to show that a kitchen would remain on the campus and then a new kitchen would be added, one being kosher. Additionally, the space for larger expansion on the Fulton Street campus is to the south and to the east. And this is showing a larger sanctuary, which is right-sized for the community so that you can have 2 full-size high holiday events happening at the same time. I think this is a big question that has to be answered and really understood during the design phase, as if we're designing for the high holidays or if we're designing for average use, or how we accommodate these different ebbs and flows of the Jewish calendar. But right now we know that this site can handle the size of 2 sanctuaries, that each supporting the 2 congregations. And with that comes a lot of space. So there's social spaces that attach to sanctuaries. There's conferencing or kiddush spaces that attach to sanctuary use. We do know that if the archive is to grow, and in this study, the archive grows into the existing library, that obviously displaces the library. So we've accommodated for some library space in the addition. And this library would obviously need to be large enough to not only accommodate the collections and needs of Temple, but also combined in the collections and needs of the Havas library program. Federation offices would obviously be moving here as a tenant within the larger umbrella of the collaboration. And so their offices are accounted for here. Again, this is not a design. This doesn't have all the spaces and the collaboration and storage needs that Federation requires mapped out, but it is included within this volume. So we have gone far enough to understand the needs of the director's space and the support staff and the collaboration conferencing areas that they need, and maybe adjacencies to other spaces that can allow them to be successful. The other large component that you'll see in new construction is in addition to the north. This is largely relating to what I mentioned before in terms of current issues. This space needs to be improved from a security standpoint, from a a welcoming standpoint, just from a total experiential standpoint. So showing an entry that expands towards that parking lot that allows you to enter on site in a barrier-free manner to get into a point where there's intentional interior security. Potentially the UJS offices move up into this area, so on Sundays they can act as the toll gate and the welcoming entity to bring people in, and maybe during the regular week it's more of a security point check. An elevator, a lift, some stairs, all these things to think about in terms of accessibility. And then moving down and rather having a single corridor, taking that first classroom and opening the space up so that there's an intentional space for all the impromptu discussions and collisions that happen on a Sunday morning when people come together to pick up and drop off. The offices, obviously, we're going to be bringing staff from the Temple site onto, or rather from the Michigan site to the Fulton site. So an expansion of the office space needs to happen. Ideally, that office space has better connectivity to the entry so that there's a more welcoming presence and a sense of security and check-in when you walk into the building. How that's laid out is certainly undetermined right now. The number of staff and how they kind of coexist are all things that are part of the next phase of design, but we are accounting for the space. Some improvements to the multi-purpose room, potentially relocation of the UJS offices, rethinking the food pantry and how people are accessing that, updates to all the restrooms. These are all things, again, that we're looking at in terms of fitting the existing, or all of the existing programs and the current needs under one roof. Should mention also a couple site issues. In this option, the courtyard would be an enclosed space. Certainly positives and negatives to that. It would be a very secured space. It would provide more comfortable connectivity between the indoors and the outdoors without having to worry about people that don't belong in this kind of a space. And I think we could really leverage this outdoor space for more activity and more use now that it's very private and internal to the building's function. And then obviously the current drive on the south side extends from Holmdene all the way to Lawndale with a large expansion on the east side of the site. That would have to become more of an in and out from the west side of the site. And again, as I mentioned, whether there's parking or not on this space really is determined by where we place the Federation office and how we solve the barrier-free accessibility access from the north. So, and we'll have to again look at issues of trade-off with trees and green space and place for building sukkahs and all of the great assets of having a big front yard. So we did the exact same study for the Fulton, for the Michigan Street campus, rather, the Ahavas Israel building. A lot of the same issues, same concerns, obviously the first being safety and security as you enter into the building, as you are seen or not seen from the exterior of the building. Similar condition today where you used to walk into the vestibule, which is not there anymore, so that's obviously a fix that needs to happen. But once you walk into that, the common area or the lobby, there's really no visual greeting or secure greeting connection to the staff. Both Federation and the Ahavas staff are behind brick walls, and so it's hard to know who's in and who's out, which makes for an uncomfortable feeling for those that are in the building and an unwelcoming condition for those that are coming into the building. So that would have to be something that should be fixed if the renovation were to happen to this facility. Probably the largest issue that you'll see as a difference between this building and the building on Fulton is that these large spaces that the sanctuary and the social hall in particular are really not right-sized for today's community. They're much larger than they need to be. The sanctuary is really infrequently used and not very flexible, with a bema that's not accessible and pews or seats that are not movable, which means that the congregation just isn't using it that often. This is post-COVID, obviously, that I'm talking about. So that means that most of the services and worship is happening in the small chapel. And that also has its limitations in that it's right-sized for many events, but as soon as it gets to be a little bit bigger group, it's not quite flexible enough to accommodate kind of a good size gathering that still is too small to go into the sanctuary. So I think Ahavis finds themselves often having to worship in a space it's not quite right size for what they want, or what would make it for the greatest experience for them. Connection to Kiddish is kind of awkward through three sets of doors and around a corner. The library really is in need of some reprogramming and rethought, new furniture, so that's kind of a space that's really ready for some update. The Federation offices, again, probably the biggest issue with Federation offices is visibility and sense of security. The space is not too bad in terms of its size. Obviously, more space is always a good thing for storage and for spreading out, but the biggest issue is connectivity. The kitchen is got some older equipment in it. It's got some finish issues in terms of the flooring and the ceilings. The equipment and the size are more than adequate. Tons of storage. Actually, lots of storage for things that aren't as used as often. So the size and location are good. The direct connection to the outdoors, or to deliveries and to food coming in and out is all really good. But there are some dollars that would need to be spent to upgrade this. You wouldn't upgrade the entire facility and not change some of these deficiencies in the kitchen. So again, one of the bigger items with this building that's different than the building, the site, the Fulton site, is that the classrooms, which are being leveraged today for a tenant, which is a great use and a source of income for Ahavis, it's not big enough or appropriately laid out for UJS. And this is a big difference. So to fit UJS onto this property, we would have to add a fair amount of addition and new construction in order to accommodate the classrooms and the flow, the drop off, the pickup, all the things that are going to be important to UJS going forward. So positive attributes of the Michigan Street campus are obviously the size of the site. There's a lot of capacity for future growth, outdoor activities. If additional parking was needed, rather than doing a park sharing program, you would add the parking on site. And there's actually a possibility of selling off a portion of the site and retaining a lot of this flexibility. The challenges for the site, there's a higher water table that would have to be contended with. That's something that can be worked around, but it adds some cost to construction. And the biggest challenge, the single most important challenge with this site, is that much of the building is in need of renovation, if not all of the building. So as I mentioned before, on the Temple site, the white areas, the areas that aren't changing uses, really could just remain as is with no change, no investment needed. That's not necessarily true with the Ahavis building, in that most of the spaces, including the social hall, including the entry, including the sanctuary, including the kitchen, in a major renovation, all those spaces really should get updated finishes. Older, out-of-date finishes that may have asbestos in them, that should all be removed and replaced. New windows should be put in to get more light into the space. Potentially new finishes to brighten up the space and make it feel a little bit more inviting in the sense of color and brightness. Those are all things that make that you'll see when I get into the finances of this, makes this site a more expensive proposition to bring to an equitable level. That being said, the building is well suited to grow and to be renovated to make the collaboration work. But I think you'll find as we go further into this study that there's just more investment needed to get it there. So this plan is the same as that you saw for the Fulton Street campus. Anything in orange is new construction. Anything in blue is major renovation. And then the one big difference is anything in white would largely remain the same use, but would require some investment to bring it up to the same level as expected. So looking at the plan a little bit more detailed, walk through additions. So just as before, the assumption is that there'd be two kitchens, a kosher kitchen and a non-kosher kitchen with good activity or good connectivity to the social hall. Same assumption that there'd be two sanctuaries that were right size for the communities. We actually dashed in the size of the full sanctuary and auditorium at Temple over top of what is at Ahavis now, to give you a sense of the size. But as I mentioned, the beam is not accessible. There are windows on the back side of the sanctuary, but there isn't really good connection to the outdoors or to natural light. So potential new windows, allowing more direct connectivity between indoors and outdoors would be something I think that would be important. And again, that just shows some of the additional investment needed to make this building feel at the same level. New vestibule obviously is something that is important for security and just from an energy standpoint. And then the big addition here, the reason that there's more new construction on this campus than on the other is to accommodate the UJS program. The existing classrooms that run along this outer edge of the building would be repurposed to a larger archive, a shared library, a multi-purpose kiddish room. Federation would move from an interior space to an exterior space so they can have better connectivity to the community. We'd want to have a little bit bigger, more intentional pickup and drop-off space with UJS offices close by, and then all of the same spaces at the same size as what we have today at the Fulton Street campus. So this is kind of bringing the program up to a one-to-one perspective. Potential another indoor courtyard. This is not a requirement. It would be a nice thing to have, not a have to have. But the reason it's drawn here is because a lot of these spaces really want to have direct light into them. Obviously, the learning environment and experience is enhanced by natural light, and a courtyard would provide space for whether it's the kids to go to or just a place for reflection, but it gives natural light to all the spaces that are surrounding it. In a thicker building, when you get to a building of this size, courtyards can become important amenities to get that natural light. Shared offices, again, it's the same idea applied to both sites in that we don't know how the two rabbis and all the additional staff are going to necessarily have their office space laid out, but we do know that we need to accommodate the space for a combined office. Food pantry would obviously be located onto this campus, as well as storage. And then just as in the other building, the restrooms need to be brought up to code and updated finishes. So the next slide here starts to look at a high-level comparison from a cost perspective of the Fulton Street campus and the Michigan Street campus. And what we did is we tried to apply the exact same logic to both. So we looked at new construction, we looked at renovation areas, we looked at site improvements, we subtotaled that, and then we added in the same amount of contingency for both furniture, fixture, and equipment. We added in an allowance for that. Security, we added in an allowance for that. And then soft costs to pay for permitting and fees and professional costs. Whether all these allowances are right or not, they're the same. They're applied the same to both sites. So from a comparison study, they become less variables and more neutrals. So what you'll see and what we're finding is that there is a higher cost on the Michigan campus to get to an equal solution between the two buildings of a collaboration. And that's largely because there's just more new construction and more renovation on the Michigan Street campus to get it up to, I think, what everyone would expect coming out of this renovation. Obviously, one of the congregations is going to be asked to relocate. Another of the congregations is going to be asked to join and to share the ownership of the space. And the last thing we want at the end of all this is to have a building that isn't feeling like it's an improvement for both congregations. So we certainly shouldn't plan for a construction that accommodates the spaces but does not accommodate the experience. We did do a brief appendix within this study. We looked at a 2-story addition for the Fulton Street campus. We didn't have necessarily a program that was driving it. There was just a lot of questions about, what if we want to add more space? What if there's more programs that come up through design that we want to add? A lot of questions and discussions about programming. How do we make this collaboration feel and support more activities and more needs? And potentially that doesn't translate into space. Potentially that just has to do with staffing and, how to attract different populations within the Jewish community to come to the building and to work together and socialize together. But if it does translate into space, then we want to make sure that there is at least a possibility to maybe make a larger first floor renovation and then a second floor where UJS could exist. And this is a very common design layout that some of you probably are familiar with in terms of having the UJS on a floor and then more of a social and programming level below it or above it. So certainly have room to do this. We have the ability within the code to go to 2 floors. We have the ability to go to 3 floors, actually. I'm not sure 3 floors is the way that we'd ever want to go, but again, this is just a quick study, and it wasn't priced, and it wasn't meant to be one of the comparisons. It was just a graphic way of addressing the question of, can we get more building on the site, being that it's a more restricted site. We also did a second quick study on the Michigan Street campus, looking at different placements for the sanctuary that's going to be added, as well as where the Federation offices would be. And this is really getting into more design and not space planning. This is starting to look at the trade-offs, the adjacencies, the flow, and this would really be the next step as we move to one of the sites, or if we move to the Fulton site and start looking more specifically at that building. We'll get with hopefully a design committee and get more specific about how the spaces need to be sized and positioned to be successful. We did have some programming discussions regarding Jewish theater. To do Jewish theater successfully and in a way that it's got a professional theater feel and amenities to it requires some pretty specific spaces, from control booths to projection spaces to building of sets and scenes, dressing rooms. Many of these spaces can be dual purpose, but when a show is in production, it's just a matter of scheduling and figuring out how to accommodate that. And then the performance stage itself and the audience seating are all important considerations. We'd want to make sure that Jewish theater was in a space that was appropriate for them, that allows them to do professional theater, community theater in a really successful way, as opposed to being shoehorned into a sanctuary space that's first and foremost a sanctuary space and secondary a theater, or vice versa. We wouldn't want to have or ask for a community to be worshiping in what really is a theater. So as of right now, this is a hard fit to place onto either of the sites from a financial perspective. There's certainly uses that can be done in terms of rehearsal space, prep space, and there's certainly programmatic connections that can be strengthened between a collaboration and the Jewish theater. But as of right now, the Jewish theater, and as well as a mikvah, which is another idea that came up in terms of a great need or a great idea for a space to support a collaboration. Right now, these are not accommodated, but they're not accommodated in either of the space studies that we did. So as we move from space study into design, if one of these considerations or any of the other considerations that are listed on this page, or ones that we haven't come up with yet, as they are debated and discussed, perhaps they do find their way onto the building as part of the program or the future program consideration. And then the last 2 pages we did look at more specifically the kitchens, the kitchen at Ahavas and the kitchen at Temple. We had a brief discussion with a food service designer that specializes in understanding how all this equipment works and its layout and its functionality and how it equates to the number of plates that it serves and the speed of cleanup. So we have a little bit of a head start on rethinking and reshaping, but the idea is that in either scenario, at least at this point, there are 2 kitchens serving the 2 different dietary ways of celebrating events. So with that being said, I want to close my screen and thank everybody for listening to this long video. It sure would be a lot more comfortable to do this in person at one of the buildings so that you could ask questions, but it's the reality of the time we're in. If you do have any questions, I suggest that you contact Sandy Freed at Ahavas or reach out to Michelle Hammond at Temple. Both of the rabbis are on the steering committee and are fully invested and up to date on what's going on with the committee. And my phone is always available. I'm always available. If anybody wants to call me and ask questions directly, I'd be happy to discuss. So thank you very much for listening, and I hope to see all of you soon. Thank you.